Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, people. My name is Deborah Alpha Woolen, and I am your host this evening for Inside Scoop. So I'm going to share with you a few policy positions, and let's see if you can find the common denominator in each one. So I think we can all agree that healthcare, under healthcare equity, that healthcare coverage for all kids should be something that we should support, no matter who you are, your demographic, no matter what. I think we can all agree that that's important. And whether they're a U.S. citizen or a quote-unquote undocumented child, that's something that we should all support. How about restoration of voting rights for ex-offenders? And that would fall under criminal justice reform. I think that's something that we would hope that everyone would support. Restoration of voting rights for ex-offenders, people that have paid their debt to society if they've taken the wrong road, but they've gotten back on track. Or Pell Grants for people who are incarcerated, still incarcerated, but want an opportunity to get an education. I think we can all agree, or hopefully we can all agree, that incarcerated persons should perhaps be considered for a Pell Grant to go toward their education, even while they're incarcerated. How about housing affordability? Can we all agree that states and counties and cities should contribute to housing affordability because it just makes sense to fight homelessness, to fight more people being unhoused, and tenant protections for people that are renters, to make sure that they are treated fairly, that they are given proper notice, that where they live, that it's safe and that it's livable and they are living in healthy conditions. Are you with me? Are you agreeing that these are things that we should all agree with? How about supporting working families? Can we all agree that, for example, paid sick leave? Can we agree that paid sick leave for full-time and part-time workers just makes sense? Okay? And support subsidies for childcare and penalties for violating child labor laws. I think we can all agree that these are policies that just make sense. And then one more, how about gun violence prevention? No matter where you fall on the aisle, we can all agree that it's something that we should all support. Well, tonight we have with us a guest, Sheila Herlihy, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And if I'm not, she will correct me. She is with the Virginia Interfaith Center. And the one thing that I said at the beginning was, I asked if you can all, what's the one thing that all these things have in common? The one thing that they all have in common is that they are policies and policy positions that the Virginia Interfaith Center supports. And this organization, and we're going to hear more about it, but we've got groups of people from Baptists and Catholics and the Church of God in Christ. They all agree that these policies make sense. So we have with us Sheila Herlihy in our studio. Thank you so much, Sheila, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I've done enough talking. So why don't you tell us, before we really get into the Virginia Interfaith Center and everything that you all do, how did you become a part of this organization?
Sure. So I have been with Virginia Interfaith for 2.5 years. And I actually started, previously I used to work at a church in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I met Virginia Interfaith when they came and started a chapter in Charlottesville. And I was part of that chapter for a while, getting businesses certified for paying living wages and thinking about advocacy work. And at the church, part of my job title was justice. So I was already involved in interfaith community organizing, finding out what faith communities agreed on, and then bringing folks to the table to make that a priority in our civic institutions. So it was a really fun move for me when I was coming to Richmond to land at Virginia Interfaith and get to do that on an even broader scale, looking at statewide policy and the priorities that can bring people of faith and people of goodwill together to make the Commonwealth a more just place.
So let's pause right there. You said that when you worked at the church initially, and let me know where I'm getting the facts wrong, but you, or one of your tasks, or one of your, one thing that you were responsible for was finding places or policies or positions where different faith organizations agree. Was that hard?
It can be, but honestly, less than you might think. One of our slogans at Virginia Interfaith is all faiths believe in justice. And I truly do believe that. Yeah. So, you know, when I worked at the church in Charlottesville, I was part of a local interfaith community organizing group. There's one up here in Nova, I think, called Voice. And similarly, that group goes around and has house meetings and asks people, what's important to you? What matters to you? What justice issues would you like to see us focus on? And it's amazing how often those issues are parallel across faith communities. So, for example, for years I was the chair of our local committee on affordable housing, because affordable housing is something that not only everybody needs and everybody understands the need for, but also that all faith communities stand up and say, actually, people should have access to affordable housing. People ought to be able to pay for a roof over their heads. You know, if from the Christian tradition, if you believe in building the kingdom of God, then that means standing up and ensuring that everyone has their basic needs taken care of. So whether it's housing, whether it's anti-gun violence, you did a great job of summarizing some of our issues at Virginia Interfaith, but that was true on a local level as well. And, you know, we don't always agree on everything, but there is actually a lot more shared values than you might think if you don't have that interfaith background.
Sure. So I'd imagine that every religion or every group, and maybe I shouldn't use such a strong word as every, but I imagine that when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to gun violence prevention, that every group, or there are religious groups that believe they know how to tackle this. How do you, or how has the Virginia Interfaith Center helped folks kind of sift out the areas or the things that don't necessarily matter, but make sure that everyone comes together to get to progress?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because there are definitely loud voices in the room, and there are projects that look punchy but may not be viable for one reason or another. There are projects that look boring and actually could have the biggest impact. And so a big piece of what we do, I mean, Virginia Interfaith, we are very blessed. We have a very diverse board who keeps us on track, and we have a whip smart staff that, not me, everybody else on staff, I mean, but who have a lot of experience with the legislature. And so we can figure out, okay, here is what's possible. Sometimes we want to take on a little more than what's possible, because give room for grace, right? But here's what's possible, here's what's meaningful, here's what we're hearing from our network, and then bring all of that together into a conversation with our leadership, our staff, our board, et cetera, and making sure that all that happens.
So you have folks that are going to say, okay, so we're talking policy and we're talking religion, and I just see red flags everywhere for the separation of church and state, which is a completely valid concern.
Absolutely.
So how do you answer that?
I would say that first of all, I love being interfaith for so many reasons, but one of them is exactly this. There is zero chance that we're proselytizing anything, because we've got Jewish folks and Muslim folks and Unitarian Universalists and Protestants and Catholics and everyone around the table. So we're definitely not proselytizing. We're not trying to impose faith on the world. However, faith absolutely has to have an impact on the way we live our everyday lives, in my own belief and experience. I can go a silly amount in depth. I wrote a senior thesis on liberation theology across different cultures and faith traditions. Okay. So, but because of that, faith says, okay, it may or may not be, I'm not going to make everyone eat kosher, but I am going to make sure everyone has food. And because our faith is what motivates us, it doesn't require anyone else to follow that. And that's why we also say we engage people of faith and of goodwill. All are welcome around this table. But faith is a big motivator for getting folks do the right thing and to make society better.
Wow. So we are going to get into policy in the next segment, but this makes me think about a guest that I had not very long ago. She works against female genital mutilation. Even though there's no religious reason behind it, it's a lot of myth, a lot of misinformation, miseducation. But when you have folks who might believe differently, but it's harmful to some people, how do you engage them in this very important conversation?
Yeah, that again, it can be tough. I think as Virginia Interfaith, we try to stay focused on issues that bring us together. So for example, and the first one that comes to a lot of people's mind is, of course, the question of abortion and pro-choice and pro-life. There are very firm religious backings for being on different sides of this issue. So Virginia Interfaith won't take a position on that issue. We are going to focus on the issues that bring us together: affordable housing, preventing, gun safety and preventing gun violence was another issue that took us some time and some consideration to think about, because there are folks who see that as tied to faith. But as we talk to our board, again, very diverse group of religious leaders from various traditions, we discovered that our members saw, in fact, that safety and protection was the higher good. We're not going to take a position and say, no one can go hunting ever. That is not our role. Mm-hmm. But we are going to advocate for safety, and that's sort of some of those guiding principles. Again, we rely on the diverse voices in our network to keep us accountable.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. I think it's so important. I applaud the work that the Virginia Interfaith Center is doing. I think that we could be just as different as the other person across the street. But one thing we're likely to have in common is that every individual, I believe, or most individuals, let's just say at least 85% of humanity has some sort of faith system that makes sure, or that says that they don't want anything terrible or bad to happen to the next person, mm-hmm. whether they know them or not. I think how we execute that and how we make our space livable for our neighbors, that is where we have contention.
Yes.
And oftentimes it just kind of leads us into dark places. So, oh my gosh. Okay, so we are going to close out this segment. And when we get back, I really want us to get into the policy points that I was talking about at the beginning of the show. You're the expert. We're here to listen. So please make sure you don't go anywhere. Stay with us as we continue our conversation with Sheila Herlihy from the Virginia Interfaith Center in Virginia. We'll be right back.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And thank you so much for joining us back here on Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation with Sheila Herlihy. Am I saying that right?
It's Herlihy. Yes,
Herlihy.
you had it right.
Okay.
And then you
Sheila.
second guess yourself, but you're totally good.
Thank you so much for joining us as we continue our conversation with Sheila Herlihy of the Virginia Interfaith Center. So when we left off, we were talking about just the things that divide us and just the importance of finding common ground in our different faiths. So now let's really talk about the work that the center is doing from a policy perspective. And so I know that you all are doing a lot of work, but you do have some flagship initiatives that you have. So let's start out with health equity, unconscious bias training and things like that.
Absolutely. So I want to give a little bit of background first. Virginia Interfaith, we are firmly nonpartisan, nonprofit. We always work across the aisle. We've gotten stuff done with full Republican legislatures, full Democrat legislatures, split legislatures. We love working with everybody. Again, what motivates us is our faith. And so we look at what brings faith communities together. So a few years back, we were a key part. We really anchored the faith base around Medicaid expansion in 2018. And that got us thinking about the importance of health equity in all areas of life. So since then, we've expanded our health equity work. One of the biggest things we're working on this year is a bill that would require implicit or unconscious bias training for medical professionals, because we know that outcomes for people of color, particularly women of color, are just so horrifically disparate, especially in Virginia. And so to address that, we want to make sure that medical professionals are getting the training they need to be thoughtful and to respond appropriately with appropriate care. The other the other issue that is close to my heart that we're working on in the health equity sphere is Cover All Kids, which would ensure that all children whose families are income eligible for Medicaid get healthcare coverage. And right now, many folks do, but some kids are excluded because of their immigration status. And I don't look it, but I'm bilingual. Actually, the church I used to work at was half native English speaking, half native Spanish speaking. So I have seen how important this is to so many families, and I am very excited that Virginia Interfaith, with most of these bills, we work in coalition, we have partners, but we're joining with our friends at the Commonwealth Institute and some other organizations to really push to get all kids health coverage.
That's fantastic. So for those who might not be familiar, can you explain implicit bias?
Yes, absolutely. So implicit or unconscious bias is the term for being biased or having prejudgments about someone without realizing it. So give the example, one of my coworkers is very tall, and I might assume he's good at basketball because of that. And that has no bearing on reality. That's before I've even met him. But I think because he's tall, he must be good at basketball. That's a bias that currently I'm aware of. But sometimes, you walk in a room and you say, oh, hey, I need 4 people to help me carry chairs. You 4, and you go for 4 men. And that's because you think of them as stronger. That perhaps could be an implicit or an unconscious bias that you might have, that the men might be stronger than the women. These are not necessarily bad judgments, but they do affect our day-to-day lives. They're, without thinking about it, those snap judgments that every human makes. We are evolutionarily predisposed. Where it becomes a challenge, particularly in the healthcare field, it becomes a challenge in a lot of areas of life, and I won't get into all of that, but particularly in healthcare, there is a predisposition rooted in racism and culture across the centuries that says, for example, people of color have a higher pain tolerance. So maybe they don't need the same level of painkillers as other folks do. And that literally leads to worse health outcomes. There could also be, a disbelief of a person of color showing up in the emergency room saying, oh, my stomach hurts and it turns out it's appendicitis, but if the doctor is just like, well, here's some Tums, see you later, like that has devastating health consequences. So Again, those snap judgments, especially in emergency situations where you don't have time to like sit and think and be like, does my coworker play basketball? Should I ask him before I invite him to the league? Like, I can do that if we're having a pickup basketball league, but in an emergency room, in a lot of these healthcare settings, that might not be, or just crazy busy settings, that might not be on the table. So that unconscious bias really affects the quality of care people are able to get. And training can help make you more conscious. And though you're not able to spend 15 minutes debating, do I need to consider whether or not my coworker would be good on the basketball league, you can at least take that additional 30 seconds and sort of question where this is coming from and be aware of it so that you can treat people appropriately instead of how your subconscious, your unconscious mind is telling you to.
Absolutely. And that saves lives.
It absolutely does. Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So thank you so much for doing that work and then explaining why that's so important. I think that just that one thing, having someone do that, take the training, and you never know if they're in a situation where they're making a split-second decision. Perhaps if they've seen someone who looks differently at 2:15 and then 2:30, same situation, but they're treating someone differently, maybe this training could help them, wait a minute, and catch themselves.
Exactly.
And, so let's also talk about the healthcare coverage for children. Super important. So why would someone not think that makes sense?
So, I don't want to get too crazy technical.
Okay.
I have done a lot of advocacy in the immigration field myself. But healthcare coverage is deeply important. Everyone agrees, school nurses, parents, kids. The reason, the pushback sometimes is that people who are undocumented might not deserve the same rights as other folks in America. And that affects me because like that is counter to my faith. But I definitely, I know that there's a budget argument that, well, since the federal government pays for Medicare for citizens, this would be a state budget amendment. Now, that being said, it actually saves money in the long run to be able to do this preventative care. Medicaid keeps kids in school, keeps other people from getting sick. It is better for our society. It is, in fact, a win on the budget. But that concern is a common one that we hear. However, again, as I mentioned, Virginia Interfaith, VICPP, we are strongly bipartisan, and we have been talking with folks all across the aisle to discuss this issue because, the reality is we're talking about children. And our governor has made caring for children, caring for families, one of his flagship priorities. Many legislators feel the same. They may have differing opinions about folks who are undocumented in different parts of the system, but again, this is a cost-saving measure that supports kids, both non-citizens and citizens alike. So it really does make a lot of sense, and again, deeply rooted in faith for a lot of our members.
Sure. We'll probably bounce back and forth, but I just find this so fascinating. How often does the organization find itself in the middle of doctrine versus policy?
I mean, I'm hugely biased. Clearly, I chose this profession, but I don't find it conflicts. The biggest conflict are when it's something like, oh, Lord, everyone ought to be paid a fully living wage forever. And like that might be where my doctrine lies, but policy-wise, that's not actually a viable solution in 2024. Living wage in Fairfax, I think, is something like $22 an hour or $21.50, and it would be beautiful if that passed the General Assembly in 2024, but it's a little unlikely. And so recognizing that from a realism perspective, I want to move us closer there. As an organization, we all want to see us move closer. So that's, to me, the biggest area where doctrine and policy conflict is that desire to do more and recognizing capacity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, really great answer. So thank you so much for that. So let's move a bit, and this is going to trickle over into the next segment. So a topic that's super important to me, criminal justice reform. So a little known fact. So I had the opportunity to meet Sheila about maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And you talked about dogs in prison.
Oh, yeah.
And that impact of decreasing the use of dogs, how that decreased the number of bites. You said that Virginia had 270 dog bites. The next highest state had 15.
Correct.
So talk a bit about that.
Yeah, this was a shocking news article that came out a couple months ago now, that went through all the states in the U.S. To analyze use of attack dogs or canines in prisons, essentially, and discovered that very few states still use dogs in prisons. Virginia, in particular, is the worst. Across the whole country, there were 295 dog bites in the last 6 years. 270 of those were in Virginia. And that's because, for a lot of reasons, but partly because Virginia uses trained attack dogs. I'm going to keep coming back to it because it's another one of while it's not one of our policy umbrellas, it is a foundation of what Virginia Interfaith does, is that, we want to combat systemic racism. And to be frank, those attack dogs came into the criminal justice system as a part of systemic racism and slavery and all kinds of horrific parts of the past. That is not needed. Probably never was, but it is certainly not needed in today's day and age.
So dogs in the prison system, so this is an ages-old practice.
Absolutely, yes.
Wow.
And currently in Virginia, they're mostly used for cell extractions, as in when an incarcerated person is in their cell, and the officer wants them to come out for whatever reason, for lunch, for Bible study, or for an appointment with their lawyer, whatever it may be, and the person says, no, I don't want to come out. The officer can go get an attack dog and help retrieve the person from their cell. And in this article, they talked about how folks can get PTSD from this. Even the person who's not attacked, but their cellmate or witnesses get PTSD because it's just horrifying. The number of bites and the extent of the injuries are really disturbing. So that's definitely something, and we have firm bipartisan support, so I'm super excited about that issue, and we can talk more about it in a bit.
Yeah, sure. So in the next segment, I want to continue that conversation. Please make sure you don't go anywhere. It's such a great conversation with Sheila Herlihy of the Virginia Interfaith Center. Make sure you stay right there. You want to come back and hear more. We will see you in a few seconds.
Here we are, 2013. We all depend on technology to communicate, to bank, and none of us know how to read and write code.
The first program I wrote asked things like, what's your favorite color? Or how old are you?
I wrote a program to play tic-tac-toe.
I first learned how to make a green circle and a red square appear on the screen.
You're just trying to make something, trying to transfer something from your mind to the computer or to a tablet. It's an experience.
The whole limit in the system is just that there just aren't enough people who are trained and have these skills today.
The programmers of tomorrow are the wizards of the future. You're going to look like you have magic powers compared to everybody else.
Great coders are today's rock stars. That's it.
You've known for years that this is the #1 cause of lung cancer, smoking. That's why the Surgeon General issued this warning. But do you know the #1 cause of lung cancer for non-smokers? It's in this room. You can't see it or smell it. It's radon. Radon is an invisible radioactive gas that seeps inside your home from underground. It can build up to dangerous levels without notice. Now the Surgeon General has issued another lung cancer warning. And whether you smoke or not, breathing radon can cause lung cancer. That's why you need to have your home tested. Protect your family. Call 1-800-SOS-RADON. Heed the warning. Have your home tested, because radon problems can be fixed.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us again here on the Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation. So, I have been corrected, and I'm so glad Sheila did. It's actually the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, and that's so important. You all know, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know how important policy is to me. That is where the real change takes place. So it's the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. They're doing real work here to try to make change in our communities. So thank you for making that correction, Sheila.
Not at all.
Okay, so we were talking about criminal justice reform during the last segment, and we were talking about the dog bites and how the use of, and it was so interesting. One of the examples that you gave was that if an inmate did not want to leave their cell, even for Bible study, so either you go listen to Psalms or get this bite. Like, what?
I think that the Bible study, that was not actually specified, but if the correctional officer thinks that the inmate needs to leave the cell and the inmate does not want to, then they can use an attack dog.
Wow. And so the work that you all were doing to reverse that, or how are you all working to help this?
Yeah, so I mean, as with most of our public policy work, it is based in bills and in legislation. So we actually, with this one, it was delightful. A Republican lawmaker called us up as soon as he saw the article and said, "Hey, I can't believe this is happening. I want to make a change. Would you guys support me if I ran a bill on this?" And we said, "Absolutely." And so we're recruiting bipartisan patrons. Again, bipartisan support is deeply important to us. And trying to make this happen in the 2024 General Assembly, which starts in January. So if you want to keep updated on this and all of our issues, sign up to be on our email list, because one thing that we do, I mean, we rely on our members and on our base so much to get policies passed. And so one thing we do is we actually send out action alerts during the General Assembly to invite people to email your legislator. They're going to vote on this particular bill tomorrow. And then your voice really can make a difference there.
Wow. So if someone says, okay, I want to connect with VICPP, it's a mouthful, so that's so much easier. Do they get pointers, or is there like a recording or something they can say to support this bill? Like, how does that work?
Absolutely. So if you sign up on the email list and put in your address, which is the helpful piece, with your address, we can look up who your direct legislators are. And then come the General Assembly session, come a particular subcommittee hearing or committee hearing or floor vote, we will send out an email saying, this is the bill that's up, here's why it's important, click here to send an email to your legislator. If you are feeling ambitious, you can absolutely use the message from the email and call your legislator, but we do pre-draft a message that you can send as an email. You can change a line or two, include something about your own story. And again, hearing from constituents honestly makes a real difference for legislators, because they are here to represent you. They are here to represent the people of Virginia.
Wow. So at the end of the show, we are going to let you tell people how to get in contact with you and to connect with VICPP. But quickly, wrapping up the criminal justice reform work, Pell Grants for people that are incarcerated. I think that is great. So what work are you all doing in that area?
Yeah, so that's kind of a new one for us. And it may not be a bill this year, but we are looking at working with the Department of Corrections to streamline this. Long story short, if you're not familiar with the Pell Grant, it is a grant from the federal government, from FAFSA, student aid, that allows folks who have lower incomes to get money to go directly to school. And usually it's enough money to cover tuition and books at community college. For a while, from the 90s to the mid-2000s, it was people who were incarcerated were not eligible to receive a Pell Grant. Even though in terms of income, they would certainly qualify. Folks who are incarcerated are not making gobs of money. Yeah. Because, anyway, that's a different conversation.
So much.
But sorry. As of a couple years ago, there was a pilot program to get to get a few prisons for people who were incarcerated in those particular prisons eligible for the Pell Grant. And then this past July, just 5 months ago, a new policy passed that allowed any incarcerated individual to receive a Pell Grant for higher education. And so we've been talking with community colleges, talking with people who already do some college coursework in jails and prisons. It's really challenging because these days to get a degree, you need access to the internet. And that is not always really viable when you're incarcerated. So there are a lot of ways forward. Sometimes there are tablets that people who might be on the inside can use. There are data sharing systems, there are digital libraries, there's a bunch of different resources. And again, one of my brilliant coworkers is working very hard on this particular project, building those connections, talking to folks within the Department of Corrections and trying to make this a really viable path forward because, you know, one of the easiest ways to reduce recidivism is to make sure that people know what they're doing when they come out of incarcerated. And one way to help with that is to increase education, increase job prospects, increase the draw of a different life once someone has come out of their incarceration period.
Absolutely. I remember in a past life, I was a volunteer in the Manassas Adult Detention Center for 10 years. And one thing that was really interesting was how the impact of incarceration long after a sentence was served.
Oh yeah.
And so if someone has the opportunity to enrich themselves and invest in themselves, where when you're incarcerated, it's an unfortunate situation, but you're not, 9 times out of 10, you're not around that stimuli. You're not around those people and that environment that was a trigger for those unhealthy behaviors. So imagine if someone had the opportunity to go to school, to get a degree, to invest in themselves.
Absolutely.
That is the rehabilitation and restoration that our criminal justice system should be perpetuating.
Yes, no doubt about it. Yeah. And actually, talking about rehabilitation and restoration, I just want to mention briefly that another bill we'll be supporting is automatic restoration of voting rights for people who've been incarcerated or people who've been convicted of a felony. Because once you've served that time, currently you can apply to the governor to get those voting rights restored. But it would be great if it were just automatically restored.
Absolutely.
And that's a constitutional amendment, so that will take a few years in the works, but that's something we're really excited about as well.
Absolutely. So let's segue into housing affordability. In Fairfax County, that's like a huge issue, probably spreading in certain parts of Virginia. So what work is a VICPP doing in that area?
Absolutely. And I mentioned that that immigration is close to my heart. The other issue closest to my heart is affordable housing. Mm-hmm. So this is my specialty area, and I do think it's just, as we said before, just from a faith perspective, people need their basic needs met. People need a place to live. So the policies we're looking at this year, again, mostly in coalition, we want to see more money dedicated to affordable housing, both building new affordable housing, preventing evictions. There's an amazing program called the Virginia Eviction Reduction Program, VIRP, and it's been a pilot program for the last 3 years. It's just done amazing work. So we want to see that fully funded going forward, because otherwise the funding is set to expire. We also want to see perhaps some funding for a rental voucher, which would mirror the way the federal government does Section 8 vouchers. More money is always a good thing. The budget is a moral document, as they say.
That's a good one.
And then another piece we're doing in coalition is protections for renters. So there's a lot of those, but basically ensuring that renters know what they're getting into, like there aren't junk fees on the lease, they aren't applying for an apartment they wouldn't qualify for anyway, and that renters have protections against eviction and against rent hikes, indiscriminate rent hikes. So I could talk more about any of those, But then our flagship program for affordable housing, and the one I'm very excited about, is called Yes in God's Backyard.
Oh, wow, YIGB, okay.
A lot of folks have heard of NIMBY, not in my backyard, but this is sort of twisting it a different direction. This is a bill that would automatically give faith communities and land owned by faith communities an exemption on zoning so that they could build multifamily affordable housing without having to get a special use permit from the locality, without having to get a modification to the county's comprehensive plan. This Yes in God's Backyard could really transform as faith communities are reimagining themselves, some shrinking, some just recognizing that they own 5 acres in what used to be rural but is now super urban. This allows faith communities to take a step forward to do something mission-focused in the community, in addition to serving a need that, as you said, is really present all over Virginia, not just Fairfax, but there is an affordable housing crisis. I think we're short, 220,000 homes around Virginia, and so we need all the help we can get to close that gap.
So with that policy, so it sounds like faith-based organizations, churches, mosques, temples, etc., would be able to use land to build multi-home, housing essentially.
Yes.
Can they say, okay, well, we're a mosque, we only want to allow Muslims to live here, or we're a church, we only want to allow Protestant Christians to live here?
No, that would be illegal. So there's I don't know. That would violate fair housing. So you still have to go through fair housing if you're renting, if you're selling. You could not put any kind of restriction like that on the people living in these apartments or homes. This is really just a matter of increasing the supply of affordable housing. There's a potential small cutout in the bill that employees maybe get 5% of the units. So if you've got 20 units going up, maybe one of them serves as the pastor's home or something. And that maybe. But more than that, no, that would be the extent of it.
Wow. And so where are you all in the process of, so is this legislation that's just being penned, or it has sponsors, or?
Both. It is both just being penned and already has sponsors, because we are very lucky. Or rather, because a lot of folks recognize the importance and goodness of this idea. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but we do have a Senate sponsor, we're finalizing our House sponsor, and we are excited to see how this goes forward in 2024.
Wow, it just excites me to hear that our Virginia General Assembly is actually getting work done. There's no infighting, there's no one elbowing people on the steps. I'm gonna stop right there. But anyway, please make sure you come back and join us for our final segment as we continue our conversation with Sheila about the VICPP. We'll be right back.
I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead.
I'd run away. Yeah, to your way.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Yeah, mean you're well. Nice one. Some friends you are. Hi. Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homely smile. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing. Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thanks so much for joining us back here on Inside Scoop as we are closing out the show and have our final segment with Sheila Herlihy of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, VICPP for short. So when we left off, we were talking about just the importance of housing affordability and the Yes in God's Backyard policy that you all are helping to champion. Mm-hmm. So you talked about tenant protections, and the fact that it's being supported. You said you didn't want to put some people on display, but I can say them. So I think it's Senator Hapshmi and Senator Mike Cherry. One or no?
So Senator Hashmi and then delegate. Actually, we have not fully confirmed our delegate yet.
Okay. But it's bipartisan, which is wonderful.
It is.
That is good news to hear. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to supporting working families. Mm-hmm. When we talked before, as I mentioned, we first met 2 weeks ago. Paid sick leave for part-time workers. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense.
Absolutely, yes, and really. Virginia does not have a requirement for paid sick days, paid sick leave at all. So full-time work, you are not required to get paid sick days. Part-time work, you are not required to get paid sick days. And people cobbling together 2 or 3 part-time jobs to get work more than full-time still don't have paid sick days, which hurts the workers, which hurts their children, which hurts broader communities. I mean, I talk about how a person who has strep throat, still has to go to work at the grocery store and get a bunch of other people sick with strep so that they can still afford to buy groceries, which is just horrifying. Yeah. And I can't believe we made it through a global pandemic and still don't have paid sick days. This is different than paid family medical leave. Paid family medical leave is about, having 12 weeks off for when you have an emergency or a medical situation. This is 5 days a year. And in other states where they've implemented this, employers have found it not a big deal, not a major deterrent, not a reason not to hire people who are needed. And it is essential for working families so that parents can have a day off when their kid comes home from school sick, or again, when they have strep,
Yeah, it's so interesting. So we were talking about at the beginning of the show, we were talking about just the commonality that different religions have. And one common thing that we've been discussing this evening is health. Yes. Healthcare for children, the well-being of your neighbor. And I think that most religions focus on or encourage us as living human creatures, to care about the well-being of your neighbor and how it just makes the world and your space and your community just better. Like, it just makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
A rising tide lifts all boats. If those who need health care receive it, if those who need a day off get it, that makes the whole community better. This ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There are a number of aphorisms I could use. And it's just true that treating people well as a society benefits all of us.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, still under supporting working families, reauthorization for minimum wage.
Yes. So some folks don't know this, but in 2021, when the minimum wage bill passed and we stopped going with the federal minimum wage of $7.25 and started raising it, the big fight was for $15 an hour. And we won that, sort of. It said the minimum wage will go up to $12 an hour, which is what it currently sits at in 2023. And then this bill needs to be reauthorized by the 2024 General Assembly. And if the 2024 General Assembly reauthorizes the bill, then minimum wage will continue to rise to $15 an hour. Again, $15 an hour is not a living wage in Fairfax County, but it sure is a lot better than $12 an hour. And there are so many families for whom this just makes an incredible difference. So we are part of the coalition and part of the group making sure that the General Assembly does indeed reauthorize this bill and confirm that, yes, Virginia will continue to raise the tide to raise all the boats and ensure that people are getting that minimum wage of $15 an hour.
It just makes sense. I remember, I'm going to age myself a bit, but with my first job, I remember I was so excited, and you go into the little coffee area, and they've got this poster from the Equal Employment Commission or something like that. Minimum wage was $5.25.
I remember those days too.
Yeah, and so right now you said it's $12.
Yes, here in Virginia it's 12.
That's, again, I'm aging myself 3 decades, and that's the best we can do.
Absolutely, and for most of that time, for more than 1 decade of that time, Virginia minimum wage sat stagnant at $7.25 an hour. From 2009 until 2021. And so 12 is an important increase, but there is so much more that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Okay, so one more policy issue, gun violence prevention, super important. Let's talk about your work in that area.
Yeah, so this is something that Virginia Interfaith has done a little bit on in the past, but this really emerged from our members, from the faith leaders in our network. And we kept having people talk about how where we're at is unacceptable, how we are, as people of faith, we want to promote peace and unity, and we do not want to encourage violence. And so promoting gun safety is one important piece of that. Shout out to our James River chapter, who did an incredible demonstration in April, turning a machine gun into a garden tool in their local community.
Wow.
Brought in a blacksmith and everything. It was a beautiful, beautiful event. But that event and other conversations around VICPP's network really got us moving on this idea that gun safety is an important issue that we need to continue to bring to the forefront in Virginia. So we will be supporting, we don't think that anybody needs to shoot off the amount of ammunition that comes from an assault rifle. There doesn't seem to be a peaceful and loving, if you're a Christian, Christ-like or prophetic way to do that. And therefore, we are going to be supporting a ban on purchases of assault weapons.
Do you find that for people who are very just adamant about, specifically when it comes to gun rights, because it's such a polarizing issue, do you find that it is easier to talk to people from a policy perspective, I guess a policy perspective based in commonality in religion versus from a partisan perspective?
Absolutely, yes. One aphorism I learned years ago was, you can't argue with stories. Like, a person who has been hurt has been hurt, has been hurt, has been hurt. And no matter what your opinion is on the issue, to greet that person with compassion is deeply important. And so that has certainly guided some of the work. I think the heart perspective is deeply important. And talking about the safety is really important. There's bipartisan effort, I believe last year, to require gun locks in homes where there are children, because so many gun deaths are accidents. And so there are places where this does not have to be deeply partisan. There are places where folks can come together and recognize that safety is important and caring for our neighbors is important.
Wow. Okay, so with 1 minute left, please tell people how they can get in contact with VICPP to help support the wonderful work you all are doing.
Absolutely. So our website is virginiainterfaithcenter.org. You can follow us on social media at VA Interfaith, or on YouTube, it's Virginia Interfaith, because VA Interfaith, I don't know, it's taken or something. So we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, X, whatever. We're on TikTok, and we are also on YouTube. So follow us on any or all of those. And definitely sign up for our email list to make sure you get those action alerts during the General Assembly. It is, once again, I can't tell you how moving it has been for me to see constituents change an elected official's mind. You know, conversations with real people in the districts are the thing that moves policy forward. And so your voice really does make a difference. Ooh, can I mention two other pieces?
Yes.
Okay, so two other pieces. Virginia Interfaith has our big advocacy day the Wednesday after Martin Luther King Day. So that'll be January 17th. You come down to Richmond. We set up meetings with your representatives and your legislators. You get the much shorter version of the policy priorities that I went in depth on today. And then you get to go around and meet with your legislators and come back and hear how you can bring some of this home, this policy work. And so I would love to see you all there. And yeah, always donate to support our work. We're a nonprofit. Tomorrow's Giving Tuesday.
And so when is this event in January? When is it?
January 17th.
January 17th,
And there is a bus from Nova. So if you don't feel like driving at 7 a.m., you can hop on a bus.
Perfect. Okay, Sheila, thank you so much for this conversation. I am so excited, and I'm fully confident that our viewers are going to get in contact with VICPP and support. So my favorite part of the show, everyone knows, it is either or. So I'm going to ask you some questions. You have to choose which one you want, and we have some time. Feel free to give a little anecdote or a story behind your choice.
Okay.
So are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. So Winona Ryder or Keira Knightley?
Winona Ryder is classic, but Keira Knightley did play Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, and so I'd probably go with her.
Oh gosh, I have to go with Winona Ryder because of what she did in Bram Stoker's Dracula. She was perfection.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, next one. Talking during a movie or silence?
Ooh, talking. Definitely.
What?
I know.
Awful?
It's terrible. My poor husband, he took me out to a movie and I'd like lean over and whisper to him. He's like, can you please not? So now we don't go to movies in person. We probably haven't been since the pandemic. But we'll go with my sister on my other side, and then she and I will elbow each other and talk, and my husband can be undisturbed mostly.
Gotcha. Okay. Cats or dogs?
I am a pet aunt. I am not a pet parent.
Okay.
So I have loved the cats and the dogs that I have lived with or been friends with over the years. But yeah, it's hard sell on that one.
Okay, and the last one, it's so funny that you mentioned Pride and Prejudice. Okay, Mr. Darcy or Mr. Bingley?
So like Mr. Bingley, because he's so happy all the time.
He was happy. He was so goofy, but I could deal with Mr. Darcy.
Yes, 100%.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next year. Have a wonderful evening.